The Philadelphia 76ers have hit their breaking point sooner than anyone could have expected as possible. They're coming off a disastrous loss to the shorthanded Memphis Grizzlies and have now dropped to 2-12 on the season. The fingers are beginning to get pointed, and there are some real issues within this team. But there is one man who has not gotten enough of the blame just yet, that being head coach Nick Nurse. I want to address head on why I think he's a larger part of the problem than I think has been acknowledged here. I know he's been dealt about as bad of hand as possible for a head coach when factoring in the injuries that have led up to things, Joel Embiid not being ready, the behind the scenes things that we're beginning to be privy to. But I still feel that this roster as a whole, the amount of talent, there is more that should be done to this point. And to set the stage exactly here, that we do know in these standings, looking at things, the Sixers sitting at dead last in the entire NBA. 2-12 there, the worst record in the entire league. That is disgusting stuff there. Now, to add to this a little bit, do want to set the stage with this. These stats fully came into effect before the Memphis Grizzlies game, so slight changes here, but not much. Overall, they rank dead last in points per game, dead last in field goal percentage, dead last in effective field goal percentage, dead last in assists, second to last in three-point percentage, second to last in overall rebounds, second to last in true shooting percentage. Just downright putrid in just about every area of basketball that matters offensively. Now, I'm not going to fully excuse that Nick Nurse has not had his full roster here. But you know what? Tonight, at the time of recording this, me recording this immediately following after the Grizzlies game, he did. And what happened in that game? We do know that Paul George got hurt. We did get this update here saying that Paul George has a left knee hyperextension and will not return. Now, Nurse spoke on this following the game, saying that he thinks there is enough info to rule out structural damage for Paul George's knee. Said PG at one point was coming close to coming back into the game, but that the knee stiffened up on him and they decided it was best to rule out. Yeah, it was absolutely best to rule him out because there was no world where they were winning that game, despite them putting up a little bit of a fight at the end. But to have the conversation about these guys being on the floor, let's start with that this felt like the real start of the season. We finally got the moment where the big three could fully come together. That tonight was the first night in which we had a chance to see what does it look like when Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid are on the floor. Well, that lasted all of 6 minutes before the substitutions started happening, and what was full out inexcusable to me is at the tail end of this first quarter. Win this game, a game that they should be desperately trying to win based on where they are in the standings and the caliber of talent that they are facing. What happened at the end of this first quarter? None of the big three were on the floor with Joel Embiid, with Paul George, and with Tyrese Maxey, all seated on the bench as Jared McCain, God bless his soul, was there to elevate the offense and be the full engine of this team. That's inexcusable stuff from a head coach who frankly is coaching like he wants to be fired. Now, to take it a couple steps further here, let's talk about Nick Nurse. I give a lot of respect to Nick Nurse, the pathway that he has taken to the NBA. I think it's incredibly admirable the way that he's worked himself up, that he had success overseas. He had success in the G League. He's been an NBA champion head coach. But where did that take place? With the Toronto Raptors. And how did that fully come to go? Did Nick Nurse set the culture for that team? Was he the guy that, built that team from start to finish? Not even close. He won the championship in his first season there. And let's take a look at what that roster looked like for this Raptors team here. We're talking about Kawhi Leonard, who had one of the most impressive peaks that particular playoff run of any player that I've seen in my entire life. Let's look beyond that. We're talking about Kyle Lowry, who there's still clearly the love affair with on this Sixers roster. And frankly, if it were not for, Kyle Lowry being injured tonight, we might have be talking about him logging 35 minutes as one of my many complaints I have about Nick Nurse. Looking beyond that, Pascal Siakam has turned into a pretty legit player, a legitimate all-star across the league. Danny Green, we know what he brings to the table, a guy that is the consummate pro, has 3 rings for a reason. Fred VanVleet has turned himself into quite an effective career, still getting it done down in Houston and making quite a bit of money in the process. Serge Ibaka, a very good big man who survived for quite a bit of time. Marc Gasol, a guy who took Joel Embiid's cookies every single time they played. OG Anunoby, as the 8th man on this roster, is a dude making max money for the New York Knicks right now. And we're still talking about guys like Jeremy Lin, Jonas Valanciunas, who's still kicking around doing great things. Norman Powell, who's averaging 23 points per game with the Clippers right now. This is a legit team. This is a borderline super team that I think gets made out to be like Nick Nurse made something out of nothing. But that is what I'm asking him to do with this Sixers team. I need to see something out of nothing. And frankly, there's more than just nothing on this team. There's still good players. It is flat out inexcusable to me with the caliber of talent that is on this roster that we're talking about these type of ranks across the NBA. I'm not saying the Sixers should be leading the Eastern Conference right now, but to be 2-12, to be unable to make any sort of those wins is just a full indictment on your inability to raise the floor of a team. Now, here's where it gets really difficult for me. There needs to be changes within the Sixers team. It should not fly that 2-12 is just excusable, and it's clear that there's issues. It's clear that there's not the level of energy that needs to be made, people not being on the same page, the culture not being set. I get a lot of that goes back to before Nick Nurse got here. But where do those changes come in? There's nobody on this roster that is available for trade. The Joel Embiid trade conversations, ineligible until the offseason because he signed an extension. Each of the free agents that they brought in cannot be traded until December 12th, and even then there's more restrictions beyond that. Yes, there's the draft picks. Yes, KJ Martin is that tradable contract. There's little things that can be done, but when talking about actually making a change within this organization, there is not that notable piece. You made this choice here. You gave Paul George a 4-year contract. You gave Joel Embiid a 3-year max extension. You gave Tyrese Maxey a max contract. You gave Caleb Martin a 4-year deal. This is the team. This is the core that is supposed to be established for years to come. So if you're talking about making changes, that really is not an option on the table. Nick Nurse is one that is on the table there, and frankly, that is the type of spark that can rile up a team. Do I think this is Nick Nurse's fault? No. Do I think this is Nick Nurse, a guy that can get this team back on track? Absolutely not at this point in time, because we don't have any evidence to suggest that is the case. Let's talk a little bit about the offense real quick. Have you guys been impressed with how it has looked? How smooth the operation? I certainly have not. Now, when you date back historically to what a Nick Nurse offense looks like, it's very simplistic, and that's not something that is necessarily a bad thing, but it is when you're trying to elevate a team without the superstars. There is no offense that can survive on give Joel Embiid the ball and get out of the way, as we've seen with the Sixers team, because Joel Embiid has not been capable of doing that until really tonight against the Memphis Grizzlies, which we finally got that look of him. It was good to see that version of Joel Embiid is at least in there somewhere. That's about the only positive that we have to take away from tonight. Now, the larger conversation that I want to bring into Nick Nurse, beyond the X's and O's, beyond the management of the team, which, by the way, has been pretty poor as far as the way he's perceived himself to the media, the way how, chirpy he's been, pretty aggravated. Again, I get you're frustrated. These are legitimate things, but we got to talk about fixing this. You're as much of a part of things as every single one of these players who I'm sure that you would like to point blame on. Let's not get it lost that team meeting, that behind closed doors meeting, was leaked word for word with direct quotes less than 12 hours after it happened. Now, who did that come from? Whenever that is the case, I do like to sort. Whenever there is a leak, I try to think, who does this benefit? Why did this come out? So let's think about this. Certainly not Joel Embiid letting that get out. Certainly not a guy, maybe if you want to say Tyrese Maxey because it makes him look great in the story, but I'd be pretty shocked if Tyrese Maxey was that kind of guy doing that type of move. Now, I don't think there's this undying loyalty in the locker room because of all the new faces. They had more roster turnover than any organization across the NBA this season. It's fair that there is not that chemistry or that loyalty or wanting to die on the sword or keep it within the four walls. None of those things have been established on this team. And by the way, that's certainly part of the reason why they look as bad as they do. There is not that level of cohesiveness within the unit of a team here. But how did that story get out? Who did call Shams Charania? Well, my thought process here is I think Nick Nurse is the most likely candidate. Now, I did already dive into this on a previous video, talking about the elephant in the room comment, which is a familiar phrase of Nick Nurse and was used in that article there. Beyond that, I think you just kind of add up the 2 + 2 = 4 here. Who does this benefit the most? Who wants to make it known that it is not his fault? It's probably Nick Nurse, that he wants it to be made aware all the issues going on behind the scenes. He's in what I like to call CYA situation. Cover your ass. That's what Nick Nurse is doing right now to make sure that this does not fall on him. So if that's what you want, Nick Nurse, if this is not the team that you do not want, this is not the team you want to coach, then be my guest. Because that is kind of how I feel right now, that I think Nick Nurse is way more frustrated with all the behind-the-scenes stuff than he is focused on actually coaching a competent basketball team. And guess what? When talking about the solution to all this, what is the easiest way? Is to win basketball games. When you start winning, everything gets better. The pressures start to sink down a little bit. The vibes within the organization start to increase. There is not this pointing fingers. But in order for that to be done, there's got to be a hard look in the mirror for every single one of these guys. And Nick Nurse, you are not excluded by this. I do think there should be a real conversation had behind the scenes about, is this the guy that should be leading this franchise? Now, for what it's worth, there are no reports of that being the case. In fact, from Sam Amick of The Athletic here, we have this direct quote saying that the 76ers are off to a worse start than anyone in the organization could have imagined, but there are no internal discussions at this point regarding the job status of Coach Nick Nurse or President of Basketball Operations Daryl Morey, multiple league sources told The Athletic. Yes, it is true that this team has been underperformed by every metric on the court. But Nick Nurse here, the guy putting them in those positions here. A night like the previous game in which Gershon Yabusele, who's been one of your more reliable players from start to finish this season, does not see the floor until the second half. Why is that the case? There are some real issues that need to be addressed with Nick Nurse. He needs to be held accountable in the same exact way each of these players are, and this season is going nowhere fast for this Sixers team. So I'm not ready to pull the trigger on firing Nick Nurse at this very instance, but I do think those conversations should be had behind the scene. I do think Nick Nurse needs to be directly held to the fire for his part in this equation, more so than has been the case to this point. We will see how things shake out from here. There will be 82 games of NBA basketball played, regardless of whether the Sixers want that to be the case or not. It's about as bleak of an outlook as we could ever expect to be the case at this point in the season. I truly did not believe there was a world in which they could get off to this poor of a start. I thought at worst they'd be an in the mix team. They're not right now. They're dreadful. They're one of the worst in the NBA, and it looks like it when you watch them play. So there needs to be some changes from here. Nick Nurse, you better be the guy leading the charge, or the Sixers should be finding someone that wants that challenge there. We'll see what happens from here, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. I do truly feel that there has not been enough blame put on the shoulders of Nick Nurse for what this start of the season has been. So we'll see how things shape out, but appreciate each and one of you guys for tuning in this video. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop it a like on this video. I'll be talking to you next time, hopefully on better spirits, right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.